So today we're going to talk about 3-act structure. Now 3-act structure isn't everything, okay? But it's a lot more than you think. Because if you really look at it, in the structure is contained the character and the theme. Well, there's certainly other things we can talk about, like we can talk about scene construction, we can talk about dialogue. A good starting place for any writer is to look at 3-act structure and try to break it down. Now there's all kinds of structures. There's 3-act structure and 5-act structure and whatever and yada 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 yada. The truth is there's really 3-act structure.
Drei Gläser.
Because 3-act structure really just means there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. They're not really acts in the same way that we think of acts in a play, right? Because in the 3-act structure, what we're really going to watch is our first act is going to be a character deciding to go on some life-changing, transformative journey. Act 2 is going to be that journey. And Act 3 is going to be the results of that journey. In the brilliant book on writing Into the Woods by John York talks about how even scenes can be broken down into a 3-act structure, and that in every single scene, a character enters the room with a thesis, right? An idea that they want to prove. They are met with an antithesis, the opposite. And because of the clashing of the thesis and the antithesis, a synthesis is created. And that's basically what is happening in 3-act structure. Our character enters the story, they meet a conflict, and they are transformed by it. There are a lot of writers and film guru folk online that will tell you they don't use 3-act structure and don't use it and just, find your own way. And well, certainly maybe they're wiser than I am. I'm just going to tell them to go themselves. Well, there are a certain percentage of films that just do not follow 3-act structure. They're pretty minor, they're pretty small. Like we're talking about like Tree of Life, which is basically Sean Penn walking around his house for 2.5 hours. And, or Slacker or 2001: A Space Odyssey, which, starts with monkeys and has basically no protagonist. What I've discovered is that 98% of these movies follow the 3-act structure. And the ones that break it aren't usually that radical of a break. They might shift it around, or they might do what Pulp Fiction does, which takes 3-act structures, intertwines them together, and has them interconnect in the end. But very few things are really a radical break from 3-act structure. This was discovered by Sid Field back in the 70s. It wasn't that he discovered 3-act structure magically. It was that he looked through thousands of the greatest movies of all time, and he found that there was a pattern. There was a plot points or plot reversals that are happening at the same place in the same point of the story. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to do a deep dive. I'm going to break this down, and it might take some time, so I hope you're here for a while. But for every single book there is on screenwriting, there's a new take on 3-act structure with new names for all the plot points. The truth is, all of them are the same, okay? They're all the same. Pretty much, okay? Maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but largely they are very similar. All the books are very similar. All the books are essentially a ripoff of Sid Field. I will say, this is not a shot at these books. I think I've read many of them, and I always get something out of them. But what they do is they will take what Sid Field wrote in screenplays so many years ago, and they will rename the name. So the inciting incident becomes the big event or the catalyst or whatever, the big fun thing. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And I can't blame these people, because this is how you create a lane for yourself. Maybe I'll do it someday, where you announce that here's some new ideas in storytelling, and rename everything Sid Field did and pass it off as your own. Why wouldn't you do that? They all have an Act 1 in which an inciting incident happens and the character is called to go on some sort of journey. They have an Act 2 in which the character goes on that journey, and they have an Act 3 where the character returns and learns some lesson or doesn't or whatever. So we're going to use Sid Field's language, even though, sometimes he doesn't use the best language. Just because it's the first and because it's the most universal, I think it's good to start there and a good way to learn. Now, another thing we're going to find that, and why I think is what is so powerful about 3-act structure and learning it and learning the ins and outs, is that if we take the story and the plot points going forward, and then in the end we sort of rewind them, right? We take them going backwards, or see them backwards. We will see a map of the theme in the story within the plot points. And the powerful thing about that is, you don't have to go on a big preachy philosophical discussion to get your point across. Your idea is inherent in the plot points themselves and in the structure of the story, and in that way it will go felt by the audience rather than heard. It's going to bypass their defenses and hit them where it hurts, and that's the point, right? So let's dive right into the 3-act structure. This is a handy outline that I use whenever I write anything or I give to my students. The first thing we see is an opening image. Now, at the opening image is going to be a poetic statement for the film. It might rhyme with the end image, or it might even just have some sort of thematic resonance, or it might be a particularly beautiful or poetic image. So you don't want to go in with your opening image and just make it here's Chicago. What you want to do is you want to focus in on something that will have some sort of significance to the story. To give you a couple of great examples, my favorite opening images from Memento, right? We open the story and we see a Polaroid being shooken. And, it's an old trick that if you shake a Polaroid, it's supposed to make it develop faster. It doesn't work. It actually doesn't do anything. But, we're all so impatient that we're going to shake a Polaroid whenever we get one, until finally the Polaroid drops and it goes up and is sucked back into the Polaroid camera, and the Polaroid camera goes down, and a gun is picked up and a bullet flies backwards into the chamber. From the first moment, we know and understand that this movie is being told backwards. So another great opening image is the opening of Juno. We see just a couch on a lawn and a voiceover telling us this is where it happened, right? This is where Juno got impregnated. And so, what's great about that is it's mysterious and it's a memorable image. Another thing we might see in an opening image is that the opening image may actually reflect the end image. And this is something that, if you want to check out a really good video on this, you're going to see a series of great videos by an editor called First and Final Frames. And what he does is he puts the opening image and the end image side by side. By juxtaposing them, you see how the characters may be transformed by the journey of the story. So, right, like let's take this image from the opening image from Punch Drunk Love and the end image side by side. And what you're going to see is that we begin the story alone, small in the frame, dwarfed by the surroundings, and then juxtaposed to the end image where he is embraced by this woman. So he's gone from being alone to together. And that is what we want to do with the opening image, is we want to show a change, a transformation. And so by placing the opening image and the end image together, we're going to see how the character's been transformed by the journey. That's often why you might see that story is presented as a circle, right? It's circular because the end and the beginning meet. Because when we put those two images together, we're going to see how the character has been transformed. And that is what we're going to do with this 3-act structure. We are going to transform this character. That's what a movie does. It is going to make an irrevocable change within a character. Could be for the better, could be for the worse, but whatever it is a definitive change. It may end them. It may transform the world around them, but they will be changed forever by the story, or otherwise, why are you telling this particular story, right? Act 1 is the setup, and what we're going to see in Act 1 is we're going to meet the character in their ordinary world, and we're going to see them, we may meet their friends and family and see their life and their everyday, until something comes along which is going to knock that world off balance and create a call to make some sort of change. That thing that knocks the world off balance is called the inciting incident. What the inciting incident is it's the first moment that kicks the story off and sets the character off on the journey. But they're not actually on the journey yet. They're not really pursuing the goal yet, right? What the inciting incident does is it creates the need for them to do something about their life. And but they're still going to hem and haw, and they're still going to debate on whether or not to do this until something forces them forward. And that will be plot point 1, aka the lock-in. But first, before we do that, So what we're going to see, the inciting incident. Now, some stories we're probably going to see this character for the first 10-15 minutes, like in Little Miss Sunshine. We meet Olive and her extremely dysfunctional family, and we see her desire, her I Want song, as I would call it, that she wants to become the Little Miss Sunshine pageant winner. And we also get a sense of what's wrong with all the people around her, all the men in her life, her father, her uncle, have these various problems. And that's what we're setting up in this first 10-15 minutes. An inciting incident is going to come along, and that's going to put the character onto a journey. In this case, it is the introduction. Her uncle was attempted to commit suicide and is now come home to live with them. It's set the world off balance. Other inciting incidents, the droids being dropped off in Luke Skywalker's lap in Star Wars. In Wizard of Oz, it's a tornado, right? So the inciting incident brings the conflict and begins our hero on their journey. The inciting incident in every Bond movie is the thing that will destroy all mankind, or the introduction of the MacGuffin, right? Their life has been knocked off balance, and they're going to have to do something about it. So they're called to go on some sort of journey. This we call the call to adventure in mythic talk. But the call could come from a herald, for instance, in The Wrestler. A doctor comes along and says, hey, you better stop wrestling. If you wrestle one more time, you're going to die. And the call is he must go and live a normal life, work in a deli, have a relationship with his estranged daughter. The call is always going to be something that's really difficult for our hero. Otherwise, again, why is it worth watching if it's not difficult for this person? So they're going to be called, but at first they're going to refuse, right? The reason why the character refuses, this isn't, I would say, in 100% of movies. This is probably in like 92% of movies, right? Is that the character is going to be called to go on some sort of journey, and then they refuse, or somebody comes along and says, hey, don't do this, you should be afraid, you're not ready for this, they'll destroy you, whatever it is. Somebody tries to scare them off the journey. This is what happens here. In the book Save the Cat, they call this the debate segment of the story. I call it the refusal of the call, which comes from the Hero of a Thousand Faces, because I like that stuff better. All right. To explain the refusal, though, so why does a character refuse? Well, what's great about the refusal is the refusal, in a way, defines the stakes of the story. You probably heard this from many writing teachers. You must have high stakes. A story must have high stakes. Well, that would make it seem like every single story must have the world about to end, or everybody's going to die, and that would be a very narrow and uninteresting spectrum of stories. I don't think that would leave for the full spectrum of what a story can do. So I actually think you can have really low stakes in a story. If you're going to have those low stakes, then they have to be important to the character. And the thing that makes us understand, the audience understand what's important to the character, is the refusal. The more scared they are, the more effective the storytelling is, and the more exciting we are for them to go on the story. I'll give you an example. Let's compare The Breakfast Club to every James Bond movie. What are the stakes in every Sean Connery Bond? World's gonna end, Goldfinger stole all the gold, so the American economy is gonna collapse, nuclear holocaust, whatever. They're high. But how much do you care, really? I mean, I don't really care. I kind of think that even if the story ends with the world's destruction, James Bond will be on a rocket to the moon that we know all the 1% is going to take to go live in the secret planet that they have, and he'll be hanging on alien beach with a hot Martian girl and a martini. He'll be okay. But the stakes are incredibly high, but they're not personal. They're not, for him, very high, right? Now let's look at the stakes in The Breakfast Club. What are the stakes in The Breakfast Club? There are no stakes in The Breakfast Club. The stakes are they're high school kids, and everything matters to them. So, but how much do you care? You care a lot, or at least I do. I mean, that movie moves me to tears every time. I don't care if it's been canceled. The refusal, the character is offered a journey and they refuse. to establish to the audience that this is going to be hard for them. And that's something you want to think about when you create your character, your protagonist. This should be a hard journey for them, right? We want a character that is going to have a big, giant contrast between who they are and the journey they have to go on. Give you an example of that too. Michael Corleone is a great example of a perfect protagonist for 3-act structure. He is in deep contrast to the journey that he's going on. He's going to have to root out his father's enemies and become the Godfather and murder every one of his father's enemies. Michael Corleone is somebody who doesn't want to be a mobster. He doesn't want anything to do with the family business. He's actually trying to go legit. He's trying to marry some waspy Diane Keaton Kennedy-esque girl, right? He does not want to be a mobster. This is saying every story is a fish out of water story, because in any story, we take a character where they are comfortable, which is Act 1, and put them where they are uncomfortable, which is Act 2. And that Act 2 is is an agent of transformation. That Act 2 is going to transform them. So the character refuses. And to give you an example of that, Luke Skywalker says, hey, I'd love to fight the Empire with you, Obi-Wan, but I can't. I gotta go farm the moisture tomorrow, right? That's what he is. He's a moisture farmer, right? Look it up. I gotta farm the moisture. Can't do that. Then what happens? Goes home, finds Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru barbecued, right? And this is what we call plot point 1, the lock-in. Now, plot point 1, Sid Field talks about a plot point 1 and a plot point 2. These are the tent poles that you hang your story on, right? Now, plot point 1 is going to also be the break-in Act 2. This is going to send us in Act 2. And it's a lock-in because what it is an unforeseen event which forces the character onto the journey. So the character debates, they refuse, and then something comes along and boom! They have no choice. They've got to do it, right? Now, Luke wants vengeance. He wants the Empire. He's got nothing left. He is locked into the journey. And now we are in Act 2. Another good way of looking at 3-act structure is in each act asks a different question. Act 1 will ask the question, will our hero go on this transformative journey? And the answer is always yes, right? And the reason why is because if they don't go on the journey, there's no movie, and that wouldn't be very interesting. Act 2 asks the question, will our hero succeed in getting what they want? And the answer is always no. They're going to fail. And Act 3 is going to ask the question, having failed, will our hero be able to dust themselves off, pick themselves back up, and get what they wanted or discover that they shouldn't have wanted in the first place? And that answer could be yes or no. Right, so those are the 3 major questions of the acts and what makes it 3-act structure. Act 2. Our character is pursuing their goal, whatever that goal is, whether it's to rescue the princess from the Death Star or find your way home from Oz, put away the Joker for good. Whatever that goal is, your character is going to pursue that goal, and that throughout Act 2. And they will face a series of escalating obstacles. And your job as a writer in Act 2 is to create the obstacles that will challenge your hero along the way. And for that, we can pull from the high school English teacher's list of conflicts. Person versus person, person versus self, person versus machine, person versus nature, and person versus society, right? I think that's all of them. In Psycho, Marion Crane has stolen $40,000, which is like $400,000 now. And when she sees her boss, as she's driving down the street, she sees her boss walk by her and he waves. She realizes, ooh, he spotted me. He knows I'm not home anymore. He knows that maybe I'm running away with this $400,000, right? So now this sets Marion off on a drive in which she starts to feel guilt. This is person versus self, right? When she goes to sell her car and get a new one, a cop starts to tail her. This is person versus society. She's driving along and she's running through her head with all the horrible things that are going to happen to her when she gets caught for stealing this money, and the rain starts to cascade over windshield so heavily that she can't even drive anymore. This is person versus nature. And so she pulls over in the Bates Motel and she meets a nice boy named Norman. And this is person versus person, right? So we've used 4 of the 5 anyway here. And we've created conflict from all these different sources. So, Act 2 is where writers go to die, by the way. It's hell. It's a hellish and difficult time. Act 1 is just a little bit easier because you can figure out what you need. And there's a few plot points and it has to be pretty tight. And Act 3 is your resolution. It should be everything. There's not much time left and we're burning out of this story at this point. So we've got a few plot points and then we're out. It's also the shortest act, probably. When Act 2 is twice the size of the other 2 acts, and it's going to involve basically a series of escalating obstacles. That can be anything, right? Well, there's a couple tricks that will help you get through your Act 2. One of them is we're going to use a thing called therefore but. What therefore but is, this was popularized by the guys from South Park when they talk about it.
And if the words and then belong between those beats, you're basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word therefore or but.
What therefore but means is that the obstacles that your characters face cannot be and feel episodic. They should instead have a causality to them, a causal and effect relationship. So in other ways to look at it, a therefore means this didn't work. So therefore we're going to try something else. And a but means this worked, but a new complication has emerged that will make our hero's life even more difficult. I'll give you an example of this. In The Lord of the Rings, right? They're trying to get over the Misty Mountains, but the wind is going to blow them right off the mountain. It's just, just such a snowstorm. And so therefore they can't go across the mountain anymore. They've got to go through the Mines of Moria. They enter the Mines of Moria and they face a bunch of orcs and they defeat them. But they meet the Balrog that kills Gandalf, sort of, So that's basically how you use it. So we're using each obstacle as pushing our character in a new direction as they pursue their goal. And whenever they overcome an obstacle, then we've got to find a but to throw a new one in their way. Another really good tip on how to write your Act 2, which again is hell, is that Act 2 is really 2 acts, and which basically means that 3-act structure, and yeah, I'm sticking to this name, is really 4 acts. Now you're gonna see there's some screenwriting dude on YouTube, or he might be, famous screenwriter for all I know, who has sold 1 million books, who claims it's not don't use 3-act structure, use 4-act structure. Basically, it's not a new idea, it's the same. 3-act structure and 4-act structure are the same. 3-act structure is just a weird name given to it by Sid Field, and really just means that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? But the truth is that if you think about acts and the way they work as and plays, where we really sort of end and begin new movements of the story, a 3-act structure screenplay can have 5 acts, it can have 7 acts, it can have however many acts you want. In fact, Raiders of the Lost Ark notoriously has 7 acts, and every Shakespeare play has 5. But really, they're still within the 3-act structure. Every single 3-act structure is always going to have a midpoint right in that center that's going to break your Act 2 into 2 acts, which means it's really 4-act structure. I don't know. I didn't call it that. I'm sticking with it. So let's go with it. Why am I calling it 3-act structure? Would you have clicked on the video if I said 4-act structure? Probably less likely. Is it in the search bar? No. Let's just stick with the language that Sid Field used, I think. The midpoint can do any one of 3 things, or all 3. But what the midpoint is going to do is it's going to change the conflict to make it much, much harder for the protagonist, right? So, I think on the outline here it says at the beginning part of Act 2, it says your objective of your character is defined, right? Juno wants to find a home for her baby. Luke wants to rescue the princess from the hidden fortress. Indiana Jones wants the Ark. Little Miss Sunshine wants to be Little Miss Sunshine. In the second half, we may just up the ante so that the objective becomes redefined. It becomes much harder. And you think about it this way, right? The first half of Act 2 in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is sort of drawn along by the journey, following Obi-Wan and as a tag along. The second half, he is in a stormtrooper suit, running down the halls of the Death Star, blasting people. In the second half, the story is the character is much more invested in the journey, and they're taking it on in a much deeper and more significant way. The second thing that the midpoint may do is it actually may offer a revelation for our character, right? This is really outlined in the book Into the Woods by John York. The character will reach some sort of understanding or truth that they are not ready for, right? So in other words, there's a giant horrific revelation halfway through your story, and that revelation is too ego-shattering for your protagonist. So they will carry that with them all the way. And then finally in Act 3, they will come to terms with that revelation. And that's why the book Into the Woods is called Into the Woods. It's a travel into the woods where you meet yourself and back out. Give you an example of this. My favorite example of the midpoint, The Wizard of Oz. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's goal is all you got to do, Dorothy, is go to the wizard and ask him for help. She gets to the wizard, and the wizard says to her, "No, I will not help you. I only help those who will help themselves. Kill me a witch, bring me her broom, and then I will help you, and you will be able to go home." Now, this does both of the tasks here in that a midpoint can do. It raises the stakes. Dorothy has gone from the first half of Act 2, which is, what's my goal? Get to the wizard and I'll send you home. And now we're in the second half of Act 2, and our goal is kill a witch and bring me her broom. A much, much, much harder task, right? It's also doing a second thing, and it's revealing to Dorothy a truth that she needs to understand. And that truth is that you have everything you need. Only you can make yourself whole, right? Which is what she learns in the end. We think about what is Dorothy's need. Dorothy, somewhere over the rainbow, I want anything and anywhere other than Kansas. I want everything that's outside of myself. And the midpoint, she's told, you must do this yourself. And in the end, when she finally comes back to the wizard with the broom and says, "Now help me," the wizard says, "You actually always had the ability to go home on your own, right? Just click your heels together and yada, yada, yada." So the midpoint reveals a truth to the character that they're unwilling to face. And in the end, they will come to terms with this truth. The third thing that midpoint can do is it can actually change the movie. We can have a totally new movie. Now, something like Parasite changes the genre right throughout in the midpoint of the movie, completely shifting the genre from weird black comedy to thriller, psycho, thriller, whatever, satire. Or, Psycho, where in the midpoint we kill off the protagonist and we give ourselves a new one in Norman Bates. So the midpoint can do one of these three things or all of them. Now we are in the second half of Act 2, Act 2.5, I like to call it. Or you could call it Act 3, but why would you do that? So, and in the second half of Act 2, the character is going on a much harder journey with a much deeper struggle. And they're going to pursue their goal. They're going to get closer and closer and closer to the goal until they meet with something that will end it. And this is plot point 2, the all is lost moment. This is also known as the break into Act 3. So at this point, we're going to shut the journey down temporarily for the protagonist. They're going to seemingly fail. And it's really important that you nail this. It's really important that this works. Think of this story rhythm. A character pursues a goal, they get closer to their goal, they get closer and closer and closer until they reach it, and everything's great. Doesn't work. It's terrible. But if instead we have a character and they pursue a goal and they try to get it and they get closer and closer and closer, and then they get so close, and then all of a sudden something horrible comes along and they completely lose it. And then they dust themselves off, pick themselves back up, and they get it anyway, right? That works. And the reason why that works is if we really want to transform our protagonist and, in a way, the audience, we need to take them to rock bottom, right? You don't really change unless you reach that rock bottom moment that forces you to change. We must reach rock bottom if we're ever to reach a catharsis. Okay, what's a catharsis? Catharsis, you may hear about it if you're in therapy like the rest of us. A catharsis is an emotional release or a purging, right? Aristotle thought that the purpose of drama was catharsis. And then that person is put through a hazing ritual, which is the story, which is Act 2. That's why these stories are longer. A longer form story is really meant to build a catharsis, right? It's meant to build to a release, an emotional release or a catharsis. That's why a story is a catharsis machine. Huh? The story is a catharsis machine. And what the word catharsis means is it means purging. Actually, if we go to the origins of the word, it meant to vomit, right? Which I like better, right? Aristotle thought we go to the drama to vomit out our badness. What is happening within the story is that we take the audience through this hazing ritual, and then we break them with our plot point 2. We take them to an all is lost moment. And then when they're broken and you're sobbing in the movie theater, crying your popcorn, an idea can be implanted there, right? That's what Inception's about, right? It's the implanting of an idea into a person who's been broken and therefore become open to receiving ideas. That's the point. That's the point of story. That's one of the points of storytelling, is to create a catharsis within your hero and your audience. And sometimes the more it can be connected to what is the either flaw or the lie in the protagonist, the more effective that plot point 2 is. Sometimes the plot point 2 all is lost moment will be a death, like in the case of the death of Obi-Wan or the death of Gandalf. Sometimes it is a revelation that maybe you're not going to win the Little Miss Sunshine pageant after all. If it's a romance movie, it might be the breakup, right? We're always going to break them up. So the all is lost moment needs to be devastating, and it needs to be a failure. Needs to be them failing in the goal. Inception. Cobb has his gun trained on Fisher to protect him. And Cobb's wife, the projection of Cobb's wife, Mal, is right behind Fisher about to shoot him. If Cobb misses the shot, if Cobb doesn't stop Mal, Fisher's dead and the entire Inception job is off, right? And Cobb aims his gun, but he can't shoot. He can't take down Mal. Why? Because he's not sure that it isn't the real Mal. He can't tell the difference between reality and the dream. And this is what Inception's all about. It's about this inability for Cobb to tell the difference between objective reality and the dream. Eventually he realizes there is an objective reality and that Mal is not his wife, which is why that topples over. I'm sorry if you disagree, but you're wrong, okay? Plot point 2, we end with an absolutely devastating loss or failure. Bud and Woody end up in Sid's backyard where they're going to be tortured and mutilated to death, right? This is a good, hopeless, all is lost, everything is failing moment. Now, having failed, our character is now in Act 3. This is the resolution, and we've got several points that are really important in this moment. First, we have a character is going to go through a big change. Then, as a result of that change, there will be the resolution, which is in a way a kind of judgment by the writer. This is what you get for either changing or not changing. And then we're going to have the denouement if we need one. A denouement is the falling action. Everything after the story is over. It actually means the untying of knots. You could say denouement too if you want to not use the French term, because freedom fries and stuff like that, but you could say either one. But the denouement or the denouement is everything that's after the story is over. And this would be hobbits frolicking on the bed for 15 minutes and the Return of the King, right? The denouement serves a distinct purpose, which is to show how our character has been transformed by the journey. And then we're going to end with a closing image, which may reflect that opening image like we talked about before, right? So now we're in Act 3. Our character is confronted with change. They must change. I call this the big change moment. What it is your character is confronted with an opportunity to change. There's a reason why I use that very specific language. Confronted with an opportunity to change. They might change, they might not. Okay? And if they change, that is what we're going to say is an upending, or as the Greeks would say, a comedy. And if they don't change, that is what we call a tragedy. You know what the word tragedy means? It actually means goat song. Because when you would go to the drama, they would slaughter a goat to Dionysus on the way in, and you'd hear the screaming of the goats. So a tragedy, a tragadoia, I think is how you say it, is a goat song. If our character is going to have an opportunity to change, this is going to be their last chance, by the way, okay? They've hit their wall, which is plot point 2. They have failed, and now it's up to them to dust themselves off, pick themselves back up, make some sort of change in their life, and undo the lie that has been vexing them this whole story. And then as a result, they will either get a positive or negative outcome. And so it has to be a scene. We have to see them make this decision, right? Give you some examples. Napoleon Dynamite, going through an entire story of being just a selfish weirdo, has an opportunity where he can help his friend Pedro, and he makes a decision. He looks at the tape. Should I humiliate myself in front of the entire school and maybe save my friend, or do I keep myself insulated? And he makes the decision. He dances. That is his big change moment. This is how we know he's been transformed by the story. Luke Skywalker, flying into the trenches of the Death Star, must make a decision. Do I use the targeting computer, or do I use the Force? Now, I always like to look at these stories and like see them as tragedies. Like, so what if Luke is just like, no, I'm not going to use the Force. I'm going to use the targeting computer. Targeting computers, are made for a reason. They do a better job than people. So then he fires the shot. He completely misses. He fails. Everybody dies. The Empire takes over forever. The rebels are blown up, and Luke just like flies off to Dagobah to live with Yoda and cry for the rest of his life. Similarly, like let's say like Great Gatsby, right? Gatsby, which is a tragedy. What if Gatsby was just like, yeah, I'm over Daisy. Yeah, Nick, let's move back to Nebraska. I'm sick of Long Island, right? It would be a terrible story, but it would be whatever it is. So in this moment, we need to see your character make a decision. We want to watch them decide. Luke makes the decision. I'm going to use the Force. He puts the targeting computer away, and then he fires the shot and blows up the Death Star. His resolution is the judgment, is our judging him for succeeding. And in most stories, we're going to get the character is going to make a decision. They're going to change. And because they've proven to us that they can change, then they get a positive resolution. And if it's a tragedy, now they're going to choose to double down on the lie that's been vexing them this whole time. And because of that, they're probably going to have a tragic and horrible outcome. Like in Citizen Kane, where Kane, smacks his wife around and is left alone, and he never learns his lesson and just ends, dying amongst the statues and things with no human beings around him whatsoever. However, we can flip it, and there are movies that flip this, like in Nightcrawler. It's a tragedy. He does not change, but in the end, everything works out for him. Or The Wolf of Wall Street would be another example of them. Or in Chinatown, where he does change and he does figure things out, but it doesn't matter. It's Chinatown. Now the character gets their resolution. And our last step will be the denouement, the falling action. I think there's some real clunky ways to do a denouement. In some stories, you see, this is how the characters live their life after the story is over, and this is everything that happened to them, and this person's dating this person. Who cares? What the denouement should do is it should show us a symbolic moment that lets us understand that the character has been transformed by the journey, for good or for ill. Now we're going to end with one final image, and that image is going to reflect that first image, and it's going to be poetic, and it's going to end on a punchy, powerful end. Now, one note about the denouement, you can skip it. There are movies that completely skip over the denouement, like in Whiplash, skips right over the denouement and ends on a drum beat. The Lost Boys skips the denouement and ends on the words.
One thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach. All the damn vampires.
So the denouement can be skipped, and if you've answered the questions that you need to in the climax, maybe you don't need it. But sometimes a nice denouement can show us how our characters are living after the story and give us one bit of closure or one symbolic moment that shows us who they've become. Now, if we look at this and we begin to see it backwards, we're going to rewind and see a map of the character's transformation. And we're going to see these plot points backwards. We will see the final image, which may rhyme with that opening image and may give us some hint. The denouement, which is going to show us the proof that they've changed, right? Go back a little further, we're going to see the judgment. So we'll know whether it's a comedy or a tragedy based probably on how well it works out for them. Then we're going to see that big change moment. In this moment, our character changes. They make a decision. And what that decision is going to reflect an earlier point in the script. So we're going to go back even further. Maybe when we hit plot point 2, we may see that the reason our character failed and caused the plot point 2 is because they still believe in the lie. And the lie, this is the key to understanding the theme here. You can actually see this two ways: the fatal flaw of the character or the lie the protagonist believes. Our character begins the story believing a lie, right? For instance, in Inception, Cobb believes the lie that there is no difference between the objective reality and the dream. Luke believes the lie that there is no such thing as the Force, right? Dorothy believes the lie that somewhere over the rainbow the world is better than what I have in my house. And in Memento, Lenny believes that there is such thing as a fact, an objective fact. They go on the journey to unlearn this lie and be hazed out of believing it. And then we're going to go back even further, and somewhere in maybe early Act 2, could be anywhere in the script really, somebody's going to say to the protagonist, hey, you know what your problem is? This is terrible. You're going to hate me for this, because next time you watch a movie, you're going to completely notice it. That somebody says to the protagonist, hey, you know what your problem is? And that is going to be directly connected to the theme, right? There are some movies that do it more elegantly, but most movies do this in some way or another. Miraculously, that's going to reflect that later moment in Act 3 where they have to change something. Now we're going to go back even further. And we're going to see all the way in Act 1. There's something I skipped over, right? And I skipped over it intentionally because it's supposed to be unseen. It's supposed to be something you can't notice on the first viewing. And that is in the first 10 to 15 minutes when we have this introductory period where we're getting to know our character and getting to understand who they are. There's going to be a hint that there's something off balance with them, okay? A hint there's something wrong with them. And whatever that hint is, that is going to be amplified throughout the movie and is going to be directly connected to how they transform in the end. To give you an example, again in Inception, Cobb fails his job and he is on the run and he spins the top and he picks up a gun. Now you watch the first time, you think, oh well, he's picking up the gun because he's nervous, he's paranoid, there are people hunting him down. But on a second or third viewing, you notice and you realize that no, he's not picking that gun up because he's paranoid. He's picking that gun up because he thinks if he kills himself, he might wake up from the dream. He does not know the difference between reality and the dream, right? So there's that moment that the character is off balance, and it's going to be planted really early on in that first 15 minutes. Now, if we see all of these pieces and we put them together, we get basically a map of the theme and what the story is about. And this is going to be how you're going to determine the lie. And this is one note on the lie, right? On the theme. A better way to look at the idea of a theme would be what Robert McKee calls a controlling idea, right? What the controlling idea is like the theme stated. It's a bit more specific than a theme. It's like, what exactly is this movie saying, boiled down to its essence? And the controlling idea is something that you eventually want to figure out, but you don't want to figure it out on your first draft, and you don't want to go in with it, right? This is something you want to figure out on your second draft, or looking back, or maybe midway through. For me, it's like midway through writing a first draft, I'll start to figure out what it's about. But you don't want to go in with a theme. If you go in with a theme, you are basically a propagandist. You're trying to tell people how to live, and that's not your job as a writer, as a storyteller. We don't tell people how to live. We enter into ourselves, into our own psychology and our own psyche, and pull out of the story what is wrong with us, right? And what we believe and what we fundamentally know. And the great thing about this moment of off balance, and I call it off balance, this comes from Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. He says in this that the hero, having had the world knocked off balance, went on a journey to put the world back into place. And when they finally get to the village at the end of the story and everything looks good again, what they realize is what they thought was, when they thought they were, okay and whole at the beginning, they were not. That in fact they were broken. Now at the end of the journey, they are whole for the very first time in their entire lives. And in fact, that is why the story happened to them. That is my take on 3-act structure. If you want to learn more about 3-act structure, you want a really great way of learning it, what I recommend is that you take a book that you love, or a movie, or a screenplay, and you break it down. You can take the sheet that's at catharsismachine.com, and you can download it, and you can mark off the plot points and figure out where they are, and that's how you really learn it and really understand it. And if you want some help, I've also created a series of videos where I break down the 3-act structure of various movies. You can see that right here.